right, thank you for tuning in to Chompin at the Bit. This is episode 65. This episode, I'm going to talk about the college football playoff as the playoff season in college football does start today. We have the first game of we have both games in the playoff tonight with the Rose Bowl and the Sugar Bowl, Alabama, Notre Dame, Clemson, Ohio State. So basically, this episode, I will, quickly talk about those two games, let you know who I think will win both of them and who will face off in the national championship game. But the biggest focus for this episode is, I've said it before, I think 4 teams is not enough. I think the 4-team playoff has been played out. It was fine for like the first couple of years because, the BCS system was such a joke, and nobody. Well, it was very, exclusive club that was always in contention for the BCS, which just spit numbers into a computer and gave you 1 and 2. And that's who played in the championship game. It was fine for what it was back then, but we grew past that. And then the 4-team playoff was introduced. It made sense at the time because most years there was more than 2 teams that should have been, going at it for a title. 4 made sense. But now, after, several years where basically once college football starts, the 4 teams that will be there in the end. At least 2 to 3 of the 4 right off the bat. Alabama's going to be there because Alabama's been killing it for the past, 10 years or whatever. This point, Clemson's going to be there because they've been killing it the last 10 years. For the most part, you can say Ohio State's going to be there. They've been killing it. And then, the 4th spot is always kind of reserved for Notre Dame. Whenever Notre Dame's good, they're going to put them in there. But if Notre Dame struggles, then the 4th spot kind of becomes a toss-up between, Oklahoma or Georgia, schools like that. But I think we are at the point where 4 no longer works. I think the sweet spot is 16. I'm sure with the way that college football operates, they're probably going to stick with 4 for a few years. They'll probably begrudgingly go to 8, realize 8 is so great. And then from 8, maybe they go to 16, probably like 10 years down the line, whatever. I think 16 should be the next stop after 4. Once you get to 16, I think you're probably safe there. If it gets to the point where, I don't know why, but if college football wanted to go to like a 32-team playoff or something, sure. But I think once they go to 16, they'll realize it's the perfect setup for them. So I went ahead, actually, and created a 16-team bracket, which I will explain to you and, kind of give you how I would structure it, even with the bowl tie-ins, because my plan isn't to like fully do away with them, because the bowl games do serve a purpose in terms of kind of your teams that really aren't in contention. At least it gives them an extra game to kind of showcase in front of TV audience and all that kind of stuff, so they can keep those. I'm just going to make the playoffs itself better. So definitely go into that. But before I do all that, of course I have to say, Happy New Year to you guys. This is, it's January 1st. It's a day that means a lot in terms of start of something new. You can put, all from the past year behind you, turn the page, and start fresh. It doesn't have to be said. 2020 was a tough year. Had to deal with the pandemic. From the pandemic, you've got a lot of people may have lost jobs and all that, may have lost loved ones. It was tough, not just physically, but mentally took a toll on people. It was emotionally tough. So now, with it being January 1st, we can try to put all that behind us. Look forward to a year that should be better. If you are religious or whatever, the most you can do at this point is pray about it and just let it all unfold in front of you. So, it's going to be a good chance for you, myself, to, I guess for me to you, to bring you in a year of, regular content as I continue to try to grow the audience and fan base and all that, become more interactive with you guys. So, just say all that to say, I hope your 2021 is a better, greater year than 2020. And, I hope that you will stick with me through this new year and we continue to build something here. So, just wanted to get that out of the way before we get into it. So now, let's go ahead and take a look at the playoff as it is currently constructed. So we have number 1 Alabama, the undefeated team out of the SEC, the dominant factory that is Alabama, going up against Notre Dame, who's the 4th seed, the ACC runner-up of this year. They split. They beat Clemson when Trevor Lawrence had the COVID-19 issues. And then Clemson got their revenge in the ACC championship game, beat Notre Dame. Notre Dame went from number 2 to number 4. Interesting to see, side note with Notre Dame, what exactly do they do with the ACC now? Because they normally play ACC games on their schedule, but they were an independent. This year, they decided to become a member of the ACC because of the whole pandemic, and it seems to have worked out perfectly for them. I'm sure they'll go back to independent status because, it's just the way of Notre Dame. But it is something interesting to think about. Is there ever going to be a time where maybe Notre Dame puts aside their independent status and actually joins the ACC? I don't know, because they've done it with their other sports, basketball, soccer, and all that. Football is just the one they've stayed independent because they're such an entity that they can handle that status. But that's your first matchup. The second matchup, you have Clemson, the ACC champion, 1 loss to Notre Dame. Once again, like I said, didn't have Trevor Lawrence. Once they got Trevor Lawrence back, they just, took off and ran the table. They go up against Ohio State, who's probably the most controversial team in the top 4, as they played 6 games. They won the Big Ten. A lot of the bigger name schools were hoping the committee was going to punish them for only playing 6 games. They didn't. So here we are. I think in the Alabama-Notre Dame matchup, I just think at this point, Alabama is just a well-oiled machine. Not to say there aren't, issues with them, because defensively, you can't put up points against them, as we saw with Florida in the SEC title game. So as long as you have a quarterback that doesn't make mistakes, trust their reads, make downfield throws, you can have a chance against Alabama. Now, Notre Dame has Ian Book as their signal caller, their quarterback. Ian Book is a guy who does have a good arm, so he can make those plays that Trask did. For Ian Book, this is a great opportunity for him because he is one of those quarterbacks who will be in the draft next year. So this is an opportunity for him to increase his stock like exponentially, because if he's able to pull off the upset against Alabama with all the eyes of the world on him, hey, Ian Book's a guy who could turn this into maybe a first round pick next year. So there's going to be some little bit of pressure on Ian Book to, perform well against Alabama. Now, Alabama has so many weapons on offense. The Notre Dame defense is going to have to figure out a way to get at Mac Jones, get him uncomfortable, stop Devontae Smith on the outside, while also trying to contain Najee Harris in the backfield. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting matchup. I could see a kind of back and forth type situation. Maybe Alabama goes up a couple of scores, then Notre Dame kind of goes on a little run, gets a little closer, maybe with like a late score here or there. But ultimately, I do think Alabama wins this one, maybe by 10, 13 type, and moves on to the title game where they'll face the winner of Clemson, Ohio State, which I will say will probably be a little tighter contested between those two teams, only because looking at Trevor Lawrence, who's, most likely going to be the top pick in the draft. Clemson has a lot of weapons. They have Lawrence. You have Travis Etienne, who's their multi-attack weapon that they use. You can put him in the backfield. He's a great runner. You can split him out wide. He's got speed, elusiveness to, get downfield. You could put him in the slot and, give him like a quick slant over the middle and let him make plays and, get some yards after the catch. You have their defense, which is actually pretty well represented in the NFL right now, because Clemson usually will have a couple of guys in the D line that you should pay attention to, and on the back end in the secondary they usually have a guy or two that will play on Sundays, because Dabo Swinney has taken Clemson, because before he got there, Clemson was just another team in the ACC, kind of middle of the road, and he has built that program up into a NFL factory. So, and he's gone up against Nick Saban. He's beaten Nick Saban in title games. He's lost close games to Saban in playoff situations like this. So, Swinney and Clemson know if they get past Ohio State and they see Alabama in that title game, they are one of those teams that is not afraid to go up against Alabama, because that is one thing that does work in Alabama's favor with Nick Saban there. You have some teams in the country that when they get on that field and they see that crimson and white of Alabama, that right there, because of the scare factor, gets Alabama like a free touchdown, 10 points right there. And like I just said, Clemson has gone up against that, beaten them, and is very confident. So Clemson, they can get past Ohio State, would make for a rematch. I believe that was the matchup from last year, Alabama and Clemson. And it's probably the matchup that the committee wants to see. Trevor Lawrence, Mac Jones, Etienne, Devontae Smith, Dabo Swinney, Nick Saban. They know it's going to bring in the ratings. But Clemson does have to get past Ohio State. Ohio State is that team, like I said. A lot of people don't want them there. But if you've seen Ohio State play, you know that they are one of the top teams in the country. You have Justin Fields, who, for him, this is a big game as well. His stock is starting to slip a little in terms of the draft. I saw, what's his name? McShay from ESPN. And coming into this year, most people thought Lawrence, Fields were going to be like 1-2 in terms of the quarterback ranking. But now, after struggling against Indiana and not having his best game in the Big Ten title game against Northwestern, Fields has kind of fallen to the number 3 quarterback behind Zach Wilson from BYU. And Zach Wilson, we saw put on a show in his bowl game. So now Fields comes in as the number 3 quarterback. If he struggles against Clemson, who's to say he won't fall a little more? And, you know, Trey Lance is a guy that's kind of highly sought after. Unfortunately, he only got to play one college game this year. Didn't look that great, but I think with Lance, it's a lot of the potential there that has a lot of people intrigued. So Fields doesn't really want to fall too far in terms of draft stock. So if he can play well against Clemson, maybe he pushes back up to number 2 or solidifies himself as number 3. But Justin Fields, we know he can beat you with his arm. He's very mobile, can beat you with his legs. Same way as Trevor Lawrence, although Lawrence likes to do more with his arm. He'll run every now and then. But like I said, Ohio State, good team. I do think Clemson will ultimately beat Ohio State. I think this game will probably be lower scoring than Alabama Notre Dame. But I would say Clemson probably wins by a touchdown, which would then lead to Alabama versus Clemson, which that happens. We'll get into that whenever that game is going to play. So there you are quickly with the current setup. So as I said in the intro to this episode, I went ahead, took the 16 teams, which I used the college football rankings. I took the top 16 teams from that ranking, and then I went ahead and did a bracket, did the whole setup of bowl games and all of that, just to show that 16 team would still create intriguing matchups. It would tie into your big bowls, so you don't have to worry about that. And it just would be a better system for college football. And I'll show you why right now. So, taking your top 16 teams, this is what the brackets would look like. You would have Alabama versus BYU. And I do feel like BYU deserves a shot in a playoff system. They had a great year. Just think of it. It'd be here's a kind of side reason why this would work. It would be great way to audition Zach Wilson at BYU up against an Alabama. Who would not want to see that? So this way, college football is kind of doing the NFL a favor. So now there's going to be some tape on Zach Wilson against a top level defense in Alabama, because the whole thing is going to be kind of why BYU wasn't even near the radar of the playoff. Is, well, BYU hasn't played anybody. I mean, how good do we really know that they are? Well, there you go. You put them against Alabama, sure, maybe they get run off the field. Who cares? At least you get to see it happen. Now you can create some of that intrigue from college basketball, where all the time we know one's probably going to beat down on 16, but you always have that chance where maybe 16 keeps it close late in the game, or maybe 16 pulls the improbable upset, and then now the college football world will just be buzzing about the 16 seed team taking down a powerhouse like Alabama. So I just think it'll just create way more intrigue than what you have right now. And then if we look at, and just a side note again, we saw it in college basketball, was it 2 years ago, where, who was it, like UMBC, was that University of Maryland, Baltimore County, when they beat Virginia as the 16th seed, beating Virginia the number 1 seed, and college basketball didn't know what to do with themselves because they were like, they had nobody. Well, I think like a couple people picked it to happen with the whole bracket challenge thing, but it was just something that you don't have to see every year. But the years that you do see it, it makes it that much more exciting. So then the next matchup would be actually the one you have going today. Cincinnati and Georgia would be your 8-9 matchup. And then, of course, the winners of those two games would face each other. Then your next section of the bracket, you'd have Notre Dame versus North Carolina. So a rematch of ACC teams there. You'd have, so that'd be your 4-13 matchup. 5-12, we'd have Texas A&M against Coastal Carolina. Coastal Carolina, smaller school. Great year. You reward them with a chance in the playoff. And once again, tying back to college basketball, because college basketball they have it right. I mean, bigger pool for them. Basketball is probably a little more unpredictable in terms of the bigger name schools versus smaller schools, but they still give a lot of opportunity. And as we've seen college basketball, lower seeds are constantly making deep runs. 5-12s are always, 5-12, 4-13 matchups are always ripe for upset. So think of it. Coastal Carolina goes up against A&M with Jimbo Fisher, which, I mean, this would be rewarding Texas A&M as a team who was at number 5. They thought they were going to get in because of the whole discrepancy between number of games played between them and Ohio State. But ultimately they get left out. And then now you're having to tell the A&M kids, yeah, sure, you had a great year. You can't play for a title, but go ahead and show up to this bowl game and try to care about it. Which this setup would take away all of that as well. So once again, Notre Dame, North Carolina, A&M, Coastal Carolina, they would then meet up, the winners there. Next section, you'd have number 2 Clemson against 15 Iowa. Number 7 Florida against number 10 Iowa State. So if the two lower seeds win there, you could have an Iowa State rivalry game in the playoff. Would be great. Even if the top seeds win, Clemson, Florida meet up. 2 blue blood big name schools. Florida's a team who would have loved to have seen this year. They had a great year. You know, they held tough against Alabama in the SEC title game. Ultimately lost it. Unfortunately, gave them their 3rd loss in the season. And they got knocked back to a bowl that they didn't care about. Went out there, got blown out. And now it puts even more of a damper on a great year for them. And then in the final section, you'd have 3 Ohio State against 14 Northwestern. So I guess unfortunately you'd have a rematch of the Big Ten title game right off the bat. But I mean, stuff happens. And then you'd have Oklahoma, Indiana, where Indiana, I mean, unfortunately they wouldn't have had their quarterback, was Phoenix Jr. or whatever. And if he were healthy, this would have been a great matchup because Indiana was I think they were a 1-loss team. Their 1 loss was a tough game against an Ohio State team, and once they got that 1 loss, it knocked them out of contention. So, but there you are. That'd be my 16-team bracket, and then as I said, you would keep your ties to your big bowl games. And you would steal a page from college basketball because college basketball does it where you have like clusters of the bracket playing at the same location. Well, same thing here. So you would do Alabama, BYU, Cincinnati, Georgia at the Peach Bowl location, just using this year as an instance. So there, your Peach Bowl location, those 4 teams would show up. They'd play there. Alabama and BYU go up against each other. Cincinnati, Georgia play. Winners there play Peach Bowl site again. Then from there, they would move on to, I had the Rose Bowl, because with the 4-team setup, they used the Rose Bowl and the Sugar Bowl as your final 4 spots. So I did the same in mine. And then the national championship game is at the Orange Bowl, which I had the same thing here. Then Notre Dame, North Carolina, Texas A&M, Coastal Carolina would be down at the Cotton Bowl site. Now, Notre Dame might say it might be a little unfair with the Cotton Bowl, Texas, right in their backyard. But Notre Dame has a fan base that travels everywhere, so that's not a big deal. Next group, you have with the 2 Clemson and Iowa, 7 Florida, Iowa State. You put that down in the Orange Bowl, which right there near Clemson. So, they get like the true type of home field advantage there. I didn't say the Peach Bowl's in Atlanta, which right for Alabama. Of course, Georgia's the 9th seed. Peach Bowl, fine. But, Alabama plays their SEC title games every year in the same area, so that's fine. And then for the last grouping of Ohio State, Northwestern, Oklahoma, Indiana, you put them out with the Fiesta Bowl in Arizona. Play there, and then your Fiesta Orange Bowls from this year would feed into the Sugar Bowl down in New Orleans. So even if from the 16-team playoff I just gave you, you end up with the same 4 from now being set up with Clemson, Ohio State in the Sugar Bowl, Alabama, Notre Dame in the Rose Bowl, that's fine. Even if you go to 16-team playoff and you end up with 1 versus 4 every year, 1 versus 4 and 2 versus 3 in your final 4, fine. The whole thing is opening it up to teams and giving them an actual chance at a national championship. Because it's a good chance you're not going to get 1 through 4 every year. Who's to say like an A&M couldn't knock off a Notre Dame in the 5-4 matchup? And Oklahoma takes down an Ohio State. Who says that can't happen? So, my overwhelming reason for this was to give teams like BYU, Cincinnati, Coastal Carolina, Iowa State, give them a fair shot. Because what's the point of having all these college football teams if really only 4 to like 6 teams think they have a real shot? And I think opening up to 16 helps with recruiting. So take a Coastal Carolina. Now they can go to maybe into a broader range of homes and say, hey, come to Coastal Carolina. We can get into the playoff. And once we're in the playoff, you'll get a chance to go up against a bigger name school, maybe a school that's recruiting you now. But if you go there, you're going to be the 4th or 5th guy in your position group. You come to Coastal Carolina, you're an automatic starter, and now you get to go up against these bigger name teams and show them, what you're all about. And playing to a big audience in the playoff. Because I do think that is part of the issue with the 4-team playoff is just when Alabama and Notre Dame play tonight, just look at their rosters. It's nothing but 5-star, 4-star guys backing up 5-star and 4-star guys. Yes, those players chose to go there, but for these players, they're only going there because college football has turned it into all about the 4-team playoff. And if you're not playing for one of these 4 teams, your season's kind of crap. And I don't think that's fair to other teams, because if you look at recruiting every year, Alabama does well, Clemson does well, Ohio State does well, Notre Dame does well, Georgia kills it, Oregon kills it, which, my 16-team playoff actually doesn't give the Pac-12 any love at all. But then again, that was on the college football committee. Like I said, I took the 16 that they had. If I had to put 16 teams together, it would have looked a little different anyway. I would have put, so with the 16 playoff, how I would structure it is you have your Power 5 conferences, so automatically those 5 champions get into the playoff. Then you have your group of 5 conferences. That's where like Cincinnati, Coastal Carolina, BYU, those type of teams are in. I think you could bring in those 5 champions into it. Now you have 10 teams. And then you're kind of opening your final 6 spots and up to like wild cards. You know, if you want to take a couple of teams from the SEC who had great seasons, like Florida, Georgia, fine. You want to bring in ACC team who may have flamed out later on, North Carolina, fine. You're going to bring in some Big 12 teams or Big 10, Indianas and Iowa States or whatever, fine. There you go. But yeah, so then even with the bowl tie-ins, I'm not really completely sold on them having to do it the way I did, where you have 4 teams at each of the major bowl sites: Peach Bowl, Cotton Bowl, Orange Bowl, Fiesta Bowl. And you would do the same with mine as the football playoff does, where they rotate it every year. So, because you give the Bulls another chance to, you know, get the national championship game, you still use that rotation. Because this year's the Orange Bowl. Then, you know, next year you could use the Sugar Bowl. Then you use the Rose Bowl, Peach Bowl. Just rotate it that way. Fine. But if the committee did want to use the Peach Bowl and stuff as your like quarterfinal matchup, fine. You could just move like Alabama, BYU back to the, I don't know, Gator Bowl or something. Put Cincinnati, Georgia at the Outback Bowl. And then you move them to the Peach Bowl. If they did that, I wouldn't be mad at that either. I just chose to do it this way because you keep your bigger name bowls separate in terms of importance from the rest of the bowls, like your Sun Bowl, Tax Slayer Bowl, all that stuff. You can still give those to those other teams that normally get it, the ones that aren't good enough for the playoff, but it does give them a sense of accomplishment at the end of their year to win a bowl game. And we all know that college football is all about money. Think of the money that they would generate from this. Given bigger bowls, multiple games at their site. So that's more money to bring in for those bowls. You're still keeping all of your other bowls occupied with a bunch of other teams. I mean, yeah, you'll probably have a lot of like 6-6 teams in bowls. Well, who cares? A lot of those other bowls, only those schools' fan bases are really watching anyway. So you're just rewarding them for their accomplishment over the season. You keep all of that. But yeah, I just think 16 teams is the way to go. And I want to say ultimately I think college football does get to the 16 teams. But I don't know. They're just really stubborn with the way that they act, so probably get used to 8 teams for a little bit. And I guess one last note. The difference here, so right now you have 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's always the argument of team like 5 and 6 who feels like they got robbed. You go to 8. Looking at it, 8, you would have stopped at Cincinnati. So you probably would have heard some beef from Georgia fans like, hey, we're better than Cincinnati, blah, blah, blah. Fine. Once you get to 10, Iowa State, that's probably a smaller argument, but only because Iowa State isn't really seen as a football powerhouse anyway. But you get to 16, now you're down to like team number 17, which was like, I think it was like San Jose State or something. I mean, nobody's listening to that argument if San Jose State is saying we should be in over BYU. I mean, ultimately, no matter what size you go to, there's always some fan base that's upset. I mean, look at college basketball. They were doing 64 teams all this time, and you always heard complaints about, well, Team 65 is better than Team 63, and why didn't they get in? And they're now to 68, but whatever. We don't need that much in college football. And then the very last note. For those of you who are college football fans, may not have known that. So, major college football is the FBS, which is like football bowl system or something. There's actually a second division in football, which is the FCS, like football championship system. Did you guys know that the FCS has been using a playoff format kind of like mine's all this time, and it's worked for them? So I'm sure college football could figure out a way to get this to work into their schedule, since it's all about the kids and finals and all that kind of stuff, which I think is a lie, but that's their argument against it. So even with that, I mean, you could do it where with the 16, maybe you do like one game from each site on day one. So example, Cincinnati, Georgia from the Peach Bowl. That's your first day. You could do like A&M, Coastal Carolina from the Cotton Bowl. That's game 2 of day 1. Florida, Iowa State from the Orange Bowl, game 3. Then Oklahoma, Indiana, game 4 from the Fiesta Bowl. So you have your 4 games the first day of the playoff. Second day, you get the top seeds in these quadrants. So your Alabama would play Notre Dame, Clemson, Ohio State. That's day 2. Then day 3, you would do, maybe you just do a doubleheader at that point. I don't know, or you do 4 more games where it's Alabama, just using the top seeds. So Alabama, Cincinnati, Peach Bowl, first game of the day. Notre Dame, A&M, Cotton Bowl, then Clemson, Florida, Ohio State, Oklahoma. So back-to-back days, 4 games, 1 from each site. Then once you get down to the Rose Bowl and Sugar Bowl, you can split those up, or well, they'd probably have to play both those games on the same day. But it'd be a great doubleheader. And then Orange Bowl, of course, would always, your national championship game always gets big ratings. So, but yeah, that's my setup. I think it works pretty well. You know, let me know in the comments whether you like it or not. And you know, best way to comment, you can join the Facebook page, Chompin at the Bit, or follow the show on Twitter at Chompin Podcast. So that's at Chompin, capital C, and then one word still, capital P for podcast. So there, on Twitter, you know, it's where you can follow the show, interact as well. I will be putting up a poll on Twitter. Probably later today. It'll probably be based off of the 4-team playoff. But I probably will also do a poll up there about 16 teams versus 4 teams. So, you know, if you want to join into the conversation with that one, go over to Twitter for that. But thanks again for tuning in. Hope you had fun with this one. Thought it was, you know, I had fun bringing it to you. So it's day 1 of 2021. Like I said, let's go ahead and reach for bigger for the podcast, and let's have a great year. So thanks again. Be safe out there. Oh, wait a minute. Before I close it out completely, looking ahead to tomorrow's episode, or at least the next episode. Let's see. Today is Friday. So next episode, we'll probably look at, we'll go NFL, because it's going to be the final week of the regular season. So we'll be looking at playoff races, what can be clinched, what scenarios are out there in play. It'll be my final week of regular season picks. I will do playoff picks. So we'll definitely do that. and we'll do some other stuff with the NFL. Maybe look at some disappointing teams from the year, some surprises, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so definitely tune in for that one in the next episode. So yes, be safe, God bless, and I'll check you out for that episode. All right.